The grand conclave of the Galactic Concordat was a chamber designed to humble empires. Its ceiling was a dome of captured starlight, a slow, swirling nebula held in a state of impossible stillness, casting down light that had traveled for millennia to illuminate the fleeting debates of mortal species. Pillars of polished obsidian, veined with filaments of living energy, rose from a floor so vast that the delegations arrayed upon it seemed like scattered islands in a sea of silent black stone. In the center, a tiered dais held the Arbiter's throne, empty for this session, its vacancy a silent testament to the gravity of the crisis. There was no sound but the low, resonant hum of the chamber's atmospheric regulators and the almost imperceptible rustle of ceremonial robes, the soft clink of crystalline carapaces, and the whisper-thin exhalations of 100 different biologies. The air itself felt heavy, thick with unspoken fear and ancient animosity, a pressure that had been building for cycles. High Adjudicator Kalen of the Signian Ascendancy stood at his designated plinth, his multifaceted eyes taking in the scene with a weariness that went deeper than his centuries of service. His own carapace, a deep cobalt blue etched with the fine silver lines of age, felt tight around his thorax. He had seen this before. He had seen the Concordat tremble on the brink of schism, had witnessed the slow, inexorable slide from diplomatic posturing to the mobilization of fleets. But this was different. The source of the terror was not a known rival, not a resurgent empire from the galactic rim or a rebellion festering within their own borders. It was a ghost, a phantom that had drifted into their reality from a sector of space they had long dismissed as a barren cradle, a cosmic nursery of young, unremarkable stars. It was the newcomer species, humanity, and it was their ship. The object hung on the main hololith that dominated the space above the empty Arbiter's throne, a vessel of impossible design. It was not a creation of elegant curves or aggressive angles. It was a perfect, featureless ovoid, a shape that seemed to be an affront to the very principles of starship engineering. Its hull was a shade of black that did not reflect light but seemed to consume it, creating a hole in the starfield behind it. There were no visible weapon emplacements, no sensor arrays, no engine signatures that their most sophisticated instruments could decipher. And yet, it radiated power. Not the raw, crackling energy of a singularity core or the thrumming resonance of a warp drive, but a silent, suffocating pressure that distorted the very fabric of spacetime around it. Their sensor readings were a cascade of contradictions and impossibilities. The ship registered as having near-infinite mass and no mass at all, simultaneously. It was present, yet its quantum signature suggested it was phased across a membrane of realities they could not perceive. The Concordat's finest military minds had called it an abomination of physics. The mystics and philosophers called it a scar on the heavens. They had named it, in their own tongue, the Justice. "It is a weapon," Warlord Atrak of the Cathar Dominion thundered, his guttural voice, amplified by his plinth's resonator, echoing through the cavernous hall. His species were mountains of fur and muscle, bred for conquest, their philosophy forged in the crucible of a high-gravity world where only the ruthless survived. A weapon of unparalleled magnitude poised at the throat of the Tory sector. These humans, these soft-skinned primitives, have built a doomsday device and dare to place it at the very flashpoint of our dispute with the Glypton Collective. It is an act of aggression, a declaration of war against this entire Concordat. Across the chamber, the Glypton emissary, a slender, insected being whose body shimmered with 1,000 iridescent scales, shifted its weight. Its voice was a series of soft, precise clicks and whistles, translated into the Concordat's formal cant by a drone that hovered near its head. "Aggression implies intent, Warlord. We see no intent. We see only a void, a question mark given form. To strike it would be to strike a shadow. To hail it is to receive only silence." Perhaps it is not a weapon, but a monument to their own arrogance, a hollow shell designed to intimidate. Kalen watched the exchange, his mandibles clicking softly in contemplation. Arrogance and aggression, the two poles of their limited understanding. The Cathar, a warrior culture, saw a blade. The Glyptons, a race of strategists and information brokers, saw a deception. Neither, he suspected, came close to the truth. The humans were a puzzle the Concordat had failed to solve for the 60 standard cycles since their first formal contact. They had emerged from their Sol system with technology that was a bizarre mix of elegant sophistication and brute force engineering. Their ships were fast but shielded, with archaic magnetic containment fields. They communicated with primitive radio waves, yet those waves carried data of staggering complexity. They were a species of poets and engineers, of philosophers and soldiers, a walking, breathing contradiction. They had joined the Concordat as associate members, observing its Byzantine politics with a quiet, unnerving patience, never seeking to expand their territory, never engaging in the endless games of influence and power that defined galactic life. They simply watched, and now they had acted. They had placed this thing, directly between the massing Cathar and Glypton fleets, a silent arbiter in a conflict that had been simmering for a century. The ship has not moved. It has not broadcast any threat. It has not powered any discernible offensive systems, Kalen said, his voice calm and measured, a counterpoint to the warlord's fury. The nebula above seemed to swirl a little faster as he spoke, its ancient light painting ripples across the obsidian floor. It simply exists, in a state of perfect neutrality. To assume hostility is to project our own nature onto a species we do not understand. We have underestimated them before. He remembered the early reports. When human explorers first encountered a Cygnian science outpost, they had been dismissed as curiosities. Their lifespans were tragically short, their emotional range volatile and chaotic. They formed intense, illogical social bonds and fought wars over abstract concepts like honor and freedom, ideas the Concordat had long ago codified into rigid legal and social structures. The Cygnian ascendancy, in its paternalistic wisdom, had deemed them a pre-ascendant species, to be observed and gently guided. Yet within a few cycles, their technological progress had accelerated at a rate that defied all predictive models. They did not advance in a straight line, building upon established principles as all other races did. They leaped, making intuitive, almost reckless jumps in theory that should have taken millennia to prove. They did not seem to fear the unknown, they seemed to revel in it. Warlord Atrax slammed a massive, clawed fist onto his plinth. The impact sent a tremor through the stone. Neutrality, it sits on the very celestial coordinate we declared as our final line of engagement. Its position is a strategic impossibility, a deliberate and calculated insult. It forces our hand. They wish to see if the Cathar are cowards who will retreat from a silent ghost, or warriors who will obliterate this affront. I say we show them. The Glypton emissary's drone translated its rapid clicks. And what if the warlord's obliteration fails? What if this vessel is not a weapon but a shield? An unbreakable barrier behind which the Glypton fleets can maneuver at will? This could be a sophisticated trap, a human gambit to align with our enemies. The chamber descended into a cacophony of voices. Delegations that had remained silent now stirred, their representatives adding their own fears and speculations to the turmoil. Some argued for a coordinated Concordat, attack to eliminate the human threat preemptively. Others counseled caution, fearing that the ship was merely the harbinger of a human fleet of unimaginable power, still hidden in the dark space between stars. The fear in the room was palpable, a living entity that fed on ignorance and suspicion. Kalen felt the familiar, bitter taste of impending galactic folly. They were like organisms in a petri dish, poking at a new, strange variable with fear and hostility, unable to conceive that its purpose might be beyond their comprehension. He closed his primary eyes, focusing his secondary senses on the hololith, the ship, the justice. It was so utterly silent, so completely passive, and that, he realized, was the most terrifying thing about it. In a galaxy where power was always displayed in the shimmering shields of a dreadnought, the roar of a planet cracker's beam, the sheer, overwhelming number of a battle fleet, this vessel's power was in its absolute stillness. It did not need to boast. Its very existence was a statement. It was a period at the end of a sentence that the Concordat had not yet learned how to read. Humanity was not issuing a challenge. It was presenting a new axiom, a fundamental truth, and waiting for the galaxy to solve the equation. Kalen felt a deep, chilling premonition. The Cathar-Glypton War was a symptom of a deeper sickness in the Concordat, a decay of trust, a reliance on force over reason. The conflict was built on a century of grievances, but its catalyst had been the Tory Prime incident, an attack on a neutral freighter that each side had blamed on the other. Decades of inconclusive investigations and tribunals had only deepened the animosity, solidifying lies into historical fact. Now this human ship sat at the heart of it all, a silent judge before a court of fools. He feared that when the silence was finally broke, it would not be with the glorious thunder of a Cathar bombardment, but with a quiet truth that would shatter their galaxy far more completely than any weapon. The debate raged on around him, but Kalen was no longer listening to the voices in the chamber. He was listening to the profound, terrifying silence emanating from the void on the hololith, and he was afraid of what it was about to say. The silence was broken not by a vote for war or a plea for diplomacy, but by a chime. It was a sound so pure, so simple, that it cut through the din of the conclave with surgical precision. It was not loud, yet it commanded the attention of every being in the chamber. On the main hololith, the image of the ovoid ship remained, but a small, unassuming icon appeared in the corner, an incoming transmission. It was a standard, open channel, using concordat protocols that were ancient and rarely used, reserved for formal declarations of the highest order. The signal was originating from the human vessel. A collective hush fell over the grand conclave. The furious pronouncements of Warlord Atrak died in his throat. The Glypton emissary's drone went silent. 100 species held their breath. For weeks, the ship had been a silent enigma. Now it was speaking. The acting chancellor, a ponderous, silicon-based lifeform from the Cygnus arm, gave a slow, deliberate nod. Accept the transmission. The hololith shimmered. The image of the ship receded, replaced by a view of a command deck. The aesthetic was as stark and minimalist as the ship's exterior. There were no flashing consoles, no frantic crew members. The space was calm, bathed in a soft, white light that seemed to emanate from the very walls. In the center of the image stood a single human figure, a female. She wore a simple, dark blue uniform devoid of rank insignia or ornamentation. Her hair was dark, pulled back from a face that was pale and composed. Her eyes, a shade of deep brown, held a stillness that mirrored the vessel she commanded. There was no arrogance in her posture, no fear, no aggression. She simply stood, her hands clasped loosely behind her back, and looked out at the grand conclave as if she were observing a mildly interesting astronomical phenomenon. "I am Captain Eva Rostova of the Terran Confederacy vessel Justice," she said. Her voice was calm, the cadence measured, each word delivered with a quiet precision that carried more weight than any warlord's roar. The Concordat's translation matrix rendered her language flawlessly, but it could not replicate the unnerving placidity of her tone. "I address the Galactic Concordat on behalf of the people of Earth. We have observed the escalating tensions in the Tauri sector. We have positioned ourselves to prevent the outbreak of hostilities that would destabilize this galactic quadrant and result in the catastrophic loss of sentient life." Warlord Atrak recovered his voice first, his rage surging back, amplified by the human's audacity. "Prevent? You have trespassed into a declared zone of conflict. You have obstructed the path of a sovereign fleet. Your vessel is an act of war. By what right do you interfere in the affairs of the Cathar Dominion?" Captain Rostova's expression did not change. Her eyes remained fixed on the warlord, yet she seemed to be looking through him at the very architecture of his aggression. "We do not recognize your declared zone of conflict. It is an arbitrary boundary drawn to facilitate violence. We do not acknowledge the right of any species to inflict systematic destruction upon another. Such concepts are predicated on a logic that our civilization has transcended." The sheer, unadulterated confidence of her statement stunned the chamber. It was not a boast. It was a declaration of fact, as if she were stating a law of physics. The Glypton emissary's drone word to life. "Transcended? Your species has barely mastered interstellar travel. You are infants in this galaxy. You speak of transcendence, yet you bring a warship, the most powerful we have ever witnessed, to our doorstep. Your actions contradict your words." For the first time, a subtle shift occurred in the human captain's demeanor. It was not a smile, but the barest hint of something akin to sadness, or perhaps pity. "You call this a warship because you can only conceive of power in terms of its capacity to destroy. This vessel has no weapons, not in the manner you understand." Atrak let out a bark of derisive laughter. "No weapons? Our sensors show energy levels emanating from your hull that could crack a continent. Do you take us for fools?" "Your sensors detect potential, warlord," Rostova replied, her voice remaining perfectly even. "They do not detect intent. The energy you see is the containment field for the vessel's primary function. It is a tool, not a weapon. Its purpose is not to wage war, but to end it, by revealing the truth." Kalen felt a cold dread crystallize in his core. He had been right. This was not about force. It was about something far more dangerous. "The truth," the Glypton emissary clicked, its skepticism palpable. "Whose truth, human? Yours, the Cathar's? Truth is a matter of perspective, a narrative shaped by power." "That is where you are mistaken," Captain Rostova said, and now her gaze seemed to sweep across the entire conclave, meeting the eyes of every delegate, every species, Kalen included. "There is an objective, verifiable reality. Events as they occurred, free from interpretation, propaganda, or self-deception. The conflict between the Cathar Dominion and the Glypton Collective is predicated on a foundational falsehood surrounding the Tauri Prime incident. We are here to correct the record. This was it, the moment the galaxy would pivot. Warlord A-Track, his faceplate flushed with fury, made the fatal error. He saw not an offer, but a final, unbearable insult to his honor. He turned to a subordinate off-screen, his voice a low, murderous command that was still picked up by the open channel. Target the human ship. A single gravimetric lance. Show this arrogant child the meaning of Cathar power. Fire on my mark. Kalen wanted to scream to tell him to stop, but it was too late. The warlord turned back to the hololith, a savage grin spreading across his features. Let us see how your truth withstands a particle beam that can shear a moon in half. Mark. On the tactical display beside the main hololith, a thin, brilliant red line shot out from the Cathar command ship. It was a weapon of terrifying beauty, a sliver of condensed gravity that warped light around it as it crossed the void at near-light speed. It moved with the silent, inexorable purpose of physics itself. It struck the human vessel. And nothing happened. There was no flare of shields, no explosion, no ripple of energy. The lance of pure destruction simply ceased to be. One moment it was there, a line of incandescent rage pointed at the heart of the ship. The next, it was gone. It did not impact. It did not dissipate. It vanished from existence in the space between one quantum state and the next. The ovoid ship did not even flicker. It remained as it was, a perfect, silent void against the stars. The conclave was utterly, completely silent. The warlord's grin had frozen on his face, his mind unable to process what his eyes had just seen. A weapon that had shattered armadas had just been treated as less than a nuisance. It had been unhappened. Captain Rostova had not flinched. She had not even blinked. Her calm, steady gaze remained fixed on the warlord. "Your display of power is noted," she said, her tone as placid as before, yet now it carried the weight of an ocean. "It is also irrelevant. Now allow me to demonstrate ours." She made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with one hand. In the grand conclave, the air grew cold. The light from the captured nebula on the ceiling seemed to dim, the colors shifting, bleeding away into a uniform gray. The resonant hum of the chamber's life support systems faded into a profound, anechoic silence. A wave of vertigo passed through Kalen as the very geometry of the room seemed to twist. The obsidian pillars, the plinths, the dais, they all became translucent, ghost-like. The delegates looked around in alarm, seeing not their colleagues, but the starfield that should have been beyond the chamber's walls. They were no longer in the conclave. They were in the void of space. They were at Tauri Prime. It was not a projection. It was a total sensory immersion. Kalen could feel the cold of the vacuum, a deep, cellular chill that his environmental suit was not designed to repel. He could see the nebular dust clouds of the Tauri sector in breathtaking clarity. Below him hung the blue-green marble of Tauri Prime's third moon, where the incident had taken place. A Cathar battle cruiser and a Glypton scout ship hung in space nearby, observing a neutral freighter, a hulking, ugly vessel of the independent merchant class, as it made its approach to the moon's orbital station. This was the scene as it had been described in 1,000 conflicting testimonies, but now they were seeing it, living it. "What is this sorcery?" the Cathar warlord gasped, his voice a strained whisper. "This is not magic," Rostova's voice echoed around them, seemingly coming from everywhere at once. "This is a reconstruction. The Justice is not a ship in the conventional sense. It is a quantum archival and simulation engine. It reads the residual quantum signatures left on spacetime by any event. It can then reconstruct that event with perfect fidelity. What you are experiencing is not a recording. It is the past reinstantiated. You are witnesses." They watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. They heard the comms chatter, the dry, procedural language of the pilots and station controllers. They saw the freighter dock. They saw its cargo being unloaded. They saw everything exactly as the official histories had claimed until the critical moment, the first shot. The Cathar have always maintained that a Glypton energy probe, disguised as a sensor drone, fired on the freighter to frame them. The Glyptons have always claimed a Cathar Marine, planted on the station, detonated a plasma charge. Both narratives were lies. What they saw was something else entirely. A third party. A small, stealth vessel, its hull configured to mimic the sensor profile of a stray asteroid, had been lurking in the moon's magnetic shadow. Kalen could now see its insignia, that of a radical splinter faction of a species known for profiting from galactic instability. The ship fired a single, untraceable kinetic slug that struck the freighter's power core. The resulting explosion was massive, catastrophic. It vaporized the freighter and a section of the orbital station. In the chaos, The stealth ship vented plasma that perfectly matched a Cathar energy signature, while simultaneously broadcasting a ghost signal that mimicked a Glypton warp drive activation. It was a perfectly executed false flag operation, designed to ignite a war that would create a lucrative market for weapons and resources. The simulation did not just show them the event from the outside. It took them inside. They experienced the final, terrified moments of the freighter's crew. They felt the jolt of the impact, the scream of tearing metal, the flash of annihilating heat. They were inside the Cathar bridge as the captain, acting on manipulated sensor data, gave the order to return fire on the Glyptons. They were on the Glypton vessel as its commander, seeing the plasma flare and the incoming Cathar volley, ordered a full-scale retaliation. They witnessed the birth of a century-long war, not as a political abstraction, but as a cascade of error, deception, and tragic manipulated rage. When the simulation ended, the light and sound of the Grand Conclave rushed back in. The delegates staggered, many of them collapsing against their plinths. The sensory and emotional whiplash was staggering. Kalen felt as if he had lived through the event himself. The stench of ozone and burned metal still lingered in his olfactory sensors. Before him, Warlord Atrak was on his knees, his massive frame trembling, his face a mask of horrified disbelief. The Glypton emissary was completely still, its iridescent scales now a dull, lifeless gray. The foundation of their identities, their righteous anger, their generations of sacrifice, all of it had been built on a lie perpetrated by war profiteers. And the humans, with their silent, impossible ship, had not just told them the truth. They had made them live it. Captain Restova's image was once again on the hololith, her expression as serene as ever. But now her calmness was not just unnerving, it was monumental. It was the calm of a mountain that has watched civilizations rise and fall. "The capacity to destroy is not power," she said, her quiet voice filling the vast, silent chamber. "The power to manipulate, to deceive, to twist reality to suit your ambitions, that is not power either. It is a weakness, a flaw in the code of intelligent life. True power is the ability to see things as they are. That is the function of the justice. It is not a warship. It is an instrument of clarity. We offer this clarity to the Concordat. The choice of what you do with it is yours." The transmission ended. The image of the human captain vanished, replaced once more by the silent black ovoid hanging in space. The ultimate warship, a vessel that did not fire lasers or torpedoes but waged war on falsehood itself. It was a weapon that could not be fought, only accepted. Kalen looked at the shattered warlord and the stunned emissary, and he understood. Humanity had just conquered the galaxy without firing a single shot. They had conquered it with the truth. And in the face of that absolute, undeniable power, the Galactic Concordat, with all its fleets and all its ancient pride, was as helpless as a child in the dark. The days that followed the revelation were a blur of chaos and painful realignment. The Grand Conclave was suspended, then reconvened in a state of profound shock. The Cathar Dominion's leadership collapsed into internal strife as the truth of their century of righteous war disseminated through their society, not as a foreign proclamation, but as an undeniable experiential memory offered by the humans to any who would receive it. The Glypton Collective, a society built on the intricate manipulation of information, found itself adrift in a new reality where such manipulations were rendered obsolete. The very foundations of galactic power, propaganda, strategic deception, historical revisionism, had been rendered inert by a single, silent vessel. High Adjudicator Kalen became the de facto mediator of the crisis. His ancient weariness was replaced by a strange, new energy. He saw not an end, but a terrifying and magnificent beginning. He opened a direct, continuous channel to the justice, speaking not to a potential enemy, but to a peer. His conversations with Captain Eva Rostova were not negotiations. They were philosophical dialogues that spanned the gulf between their two species. They did not speak of territories or treaties, but of the nature of consciousness, the evolution of morality, and the responsibility of power. "Your people must have faced a great darkness to create such a tool," Kalen transmitted one cycle, his image projected onto the calm, white bridge of the justice. "A species does not develop a cure without first suffering the disease." Rostova's image on his own plinth was, as always, serene, but he was learning to read the subtle nuances in her human expression. He saw a flicker of ancient pain in her eyes, the echo of a memory that was not her own, but that of her entire species. "We did," she confirmed, her voice a quiet river of history. "We called it the Age of Discord, Our technological capabilities began to exponentially outpace our wisdom. We created tools that could connect our entire species into a single, global mind, and we used them to scream at each other. We developed weapons that could unmake our world, and we aimed them at ourselves over ideologies that were little more than inherited prejudices. We built empires of information, and then discovered that a lie could travel faster and farther than any truth. She paused, and the silence that followed was heavy with the ghosts of a history Kaelin could only imagine. We nearly extinguished ourselves. We looked into the abyss of our own nature and saw that our greatest enemy was not beyond the stars, but within our own minds, our capacity for self-deception. We realized that survival, on a cosmic timescale, was not about becoming stronger or faster or more numerous. It was about becoming more honest. The justice is not the culmination of our engineering. It is the culmination of our philosophy. It is a tool to enforce introspection, first upon ourselves, and now, by extension, upon any who would threaten the galactic peace with the poison of falsehood. You have appointed yourselves the arbiters of reality, Kaelin stated, not as an accusation, but as a point of clarification. It is a burden of unimaginable weight. Many in the Concordat now fear you. They see you not as peacemakers, but as tyrants of the mind. Fear is a rational response to a paradigm shift, Rostova replied. We do not seek to rule, we seek to stabilize. A galaxy where truth is a subjective commodity is inherently unstable. It will always collapse into conflict. We are offering a constant, a foundation upon which a more durable peace can be built. We did not come here to give you answers. We came to give you an unassailable premise from which you can find your own. Their dialogue laid the groundwork for a new Concordat charter. It was a painful, arduous process. Empires had to admit to centuries of manufactured grievances. Species had to confront the ugly truths behind their most cherished myths. But slowly, grudgingly, a new order began to emerge, one forged not in the fire of war, but in the cold, clear light of objective reality. The Cathar and the Glyptons, their long war exposed as a tragic farce, began the first tentative steps towards reconciliation, united by the shame of their shared delusion. Humanity was offered full membership in the Concordat, not as a junior partner, but as a guiding hand. They accepted quietly, without ceremony. On the day the new charter was to be ratified, Kaelin stood once more in the Grand Conclave. The chamber was the same, but the atmosphere was transformed. The old tensions were gone, replaced by a somber, uncertain humility. Warlord Atrak was gone, replaced by a Cathar academic. The Glypton emissary was still present, but its iridescent scales seemed to carry a new, more thoughtful light. Kaelin felt a sense of profound hope, a belief that the galaxy had finally been given a chance to break its cycles of violence. He had one final question for Captain Rostova, a private query before the public ceremony. He had hesitated to ask it, sensing it touched upon a truth even deeper and more unsettling than the one she had already revealed. "Captain," he transmitted, his voice low, "the justice, the resources, the scientific breakthroughs, the sheer species-wide unity of purpose required to construct such a vessel, it is a monumental achievement. It seems disproportionate. A tool of this magnitude feels like an answer to a question far larger than the squabbles of the Galactic Concordat." On the bridge of the Justice, Eva Rostova turned away from her view of the conclave and looked out at the starfield before her. For a long moment she was silent. When she turned back, the placid calm in her eyes had been replaced by a profound, chilling gravity. The serenity was a mask, Kaelin realized, a discipline learned in the face of a tarot. Or he could not yet comprehend. "You are correct, High Adjudicator," she said, and for the first time her voice carried a trace of weariness, the same ancient exhaustion Kaelin had felt so often himself. The Tory sector was a test, a field trial for the Justice's primary function and a demonstration for the peoples of this galactic arm. The true reason for its creation lies much further out, and much further back. She gestured, and the view on Kaelin's plinth changed. It was no longer her face he saw, but a stream of data, rendered in a way his Signian mind could comprehend. It was a map of the local galactic group, showing not just their own galaxy, but its neighbors, Andromeda, Triangulum, and the dozens of dwarf galaxies that swarmed around them like moths to a flame. But the map was also a timeline stretching back billions of years, and on it there was a pattern. A red pulse, like a spreading stain, would appear in a distant galaxy. It would begin as a faint, anomalous energy signature, a whisper of quantum decay where there should be none. Then, over the course of millennia, it would grow, spreading from the core to the outer arms. It was not an explosion. It was a silencing. As the red stain spread, all other complex energy signatures within that galaxy would cease. The hum of civilizations, the chatter of interstellar communication, the spike of warp drives, the thrum of Dyson spheres, all of it would just stop. System by system, star by star, an entire galaxy would go quiet, leaving behind nothing but the natural, chaotic noise of stellar fusion and black holes. A perfectly, unnaturally silent galaxy. Then, after a period of dormancy that lasted for eons, the pattern would repeat in a neighboring galaxy. The stain would appear, and the silence would spread. It was a plague. A slow, methodical, galactic-scale extinction event that moved across the intergalactic void with a patience that was utterly inhuman. "We found it in the cosmic microwave background radiation," Rostova explained, her voice a near whisper. "Fossilized echoes of the silences. We traced the pattern. We calculated its trajectory. It is a wave, a front. It's not biological. It's not technological in any way we can define it. Some of our physicists theorize it's a form of weaponized entropy, a phase shift in physical law that makes complex information patterns, like life and consciousness, impossible. Others believe it is the work of a consciousness so ancient and vast that its thoughts register to us as a law of nature." The map on Kalen's screen zoomed in. A new, faint red shimmer was visible. It was at the very edge of their sensor range, in a small, unassuming dwarf galaxy on the far side of the local group. It had just begun. "It is here," Rostova said. "It has arrived in our galactic cluster. Based on its historical progression, it will reach this galaxy in approximately 300,000 of your cycles, perhaps sooner." Kalen stared at the map, his mind reeling. The centuries of war, the political struggles, the rise and fall of empires within the Concordat, all of it suddenly seemed like the frantic, meaningless activity of microbes on a slide, unaware of the approaching flame. This was the darkness humanity had faced, not a darkness of their own making, but a cosmic, existential void. "The age of discord almost destroyed us," Rostova continued, her gaze now impossibly distant. "We learned from it that our only chance of survival against an external, contextual threat was to first eliminate the internal, self-inflicted ones. We could not face the silence if we were still screaming at each other. Division, deception, war, these are luxuries we can no longer afford. None of us can. The justice was not built to pacify the Concordat. It was built to unite it. To strip away the lies and force us all to see the one, single, unifying truth that now matters." Her eyes met his through the transmission, and in them he saw the full, terrifying weight of what she was saying. "We are all standing on the shore of the same, silent ocean, high adjudicator. The justice is not the ultimate human warship. It is the first galactic one. Its purpose is not to win wars, but to build an alliance strong enough and honest enough to fight when we do not yet know how to comprehend." The transmission ended, leaving Kalen alone in the moments before the new Concordat was born. He looked out at the delegates, at the new Cathar academic and the chastened Glypton emissary, at the dozens of species ready to embark on a new era of truth and cooperation. They believed they had just averted a war. They had no idea they had just been conscripted into a much larger one. He raised his head, his gaze drifting up to the captured nebula that had illuminated the folly of his people for so long. The ancient light seemed different now, not a symbol of timeless grandeur, but a fragile, fleeting candle in an immense, encroaching darkness. Humanity had come to the galaxy with arrogance or ambition. They had come bearing a terrible gift, a purpose. And as the chamber erupted in the formal chimes that signaled the ratification of the new charter, the birth of a new age, High Adjudicator Kalen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's atmosphere. It was the chill of the great, silent void and the quiet, terrifying resolve of the young, strange species that had appointed itself the galaxy's final, truthful, and perhaps hopeless shield against the night.